Inventor Studio. This is our first video where we're going to go over just the basic, a basic overview of MIT App Inventor and what you're going to see when you're going to start creating your projects. So we're going to go ahead and get started. First thing is we're going to go to the App Inventor website. So you can Google search it or you can just type it in. It's appinventor.mit.edu. This is what the website looks like, and we're going to click Create Apps. So MIT App Inventor uses your Google credentials, so as long as you have a Google account, you should be able to log in. So we're going to accept the terms of service. If this is our first time logging in, you're going to see that pop up. And a few other pop-ups. I'm going to go ahead and click Don't Show Again. And then it gives you some options to look at some tutorials, but I'm going to go ahead and close that one as well. Okay, so this is what your main page looks like. I can see I'm logged in over here on the right. We have a projects menu at the very top. We have a connection, build, settings. We have a lot of things here, but this is our main menu. On this page, we can do new projects. We can organize our projects in folders, move them around, trash them, or log into the gallery to or publish them. So this is where you would publish your projects for other people to see. We're not dealing with that right now. We're going to go ahead and start a new project. So as I start the projects, I'm going to see them listed here. So let's start a new project. I'm going to call it My First Project. So something about when you name projects in MIT App Inventor, there's a couple things you can't do. Number one is use a space. If you use a space, you're going to get this error. However, you can use underscores for the spaces instead. And you can't use special characters, so like a question mark or any special character you can't use other than the underscore. So I always like to name my projects in Pascal case, which means I capitalize every first letter of the words I'm using, so my first project, or underscore is popular as well. So you make a decision. For the toolkit, we're going to keep that the same. We're not going to mess with these at all. And let's go ahead and click on OK. So when I create a project, this is going to be the main designer screen. And we're going to go over what all this stuff is. So let's start over here on the left-hand side. So on the left-hand side is what we call our palette. So think of it as colors on when you're painting on a palette. These are all the different options you have to, all the different components you have to add to your app. These are all the different things you can use. So each one of these, they're organized in drawers. So if this is user interface, you're going to see a bunch of components related to user interface, layout, media. There's lots and lots of different components you can use, sensors. The nice thing about MIT App Inventor is that it's always updating all the components. So when I first started MIT App Inventor, data science wasn't even an option, but now they have it. Every single component has a little question mark you can click and it'll tell you a little bit about it. And then it also has a link that takes you to the MIT App Inventor reference page, and it'll give you some more information and some information about the parameters and how you would go about coding some of these components. Okay. So that's the palette on the left-hand side. In the middle of the screen, you have the viewer, the main viewer. You have a few options to just change the way it looks dependent on what you want to design for. I usually just like to keep it at the default, so you don't have to change anything there. And then on the right-hand side, you have the components viewer, and then you have the properties. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my palette and show you what's going on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm going to add a button. So MIT App Inventor is a drag and drop interface, which means I take it, click on it, and drag it over to my screen. And then look at what happens when I added this button to my screen. It popped up over here. So this is my components viewer. So anything I add onto my screen gets listed on my components viewer. And in my components here, I can do a few things. I can delete it. If I don't want the label, I can rename this. Instead of button 1, I can say it's the start button. And then if I click on one of them, if you look on the right-hand side on the properties, these are all the different properties I can change for this component that I selected. So if I choose the screen, I can center align my screen, I can change the background color of my screen, I can make it scrollable or not, I can change the screen orientation, I can change the name. There's lots and lots of different things I can do, and each of these also has a question mark that gives me a little bit more information as well. And if you look at, if I click the start button, I get a whole set of other properties. I can change the background color, I can change it to an image, I can change what it says. I called it the start button. So just to give you an idea, I can make it really big. Okay, so dependent on what I click in my components viewer here, those are the properties that pop up, the ones I can change that correspond with that component. Okay, so over here on the left I have my palette. I drag my components over to my viewer, my main viewer, and then my components get listed here, and then I can change all my properties on the right. Okay, up here on the toolbar, this is where I would navigate if I have additional screens. I can add screens, remove screens, and then I have project properties. I can change the app name, add an icon. There's a few other options you have here as well. And then publish to gallery if I want other users to see what I'm doing here. Okay, so you can probably spend hours just clicking around and playing with the different components. I would recommend that. Let's go ahead and go to our blocks view since we're just doing a brief overview. So once I'm completely done designing my app, then I'm going to head on over to the top right hand corner where it says blocks, and I'm going to click on blocks, and this is my blocks interface. So on the left hand side I have built-in blocks. So if you look at all my built-in blocks, they're color coded. So my control blocks are like a mustard yellow color, my logic blocks are like green, math is blue, and so on. So these blocks are always going to be available to me no matter what components I add to my app. These are always going to be here. They're not going to change. Okay, if I go a little bit lower, my screen 1, these are all the blocks that I can use to code screen 1, and all the blocks I can use to code my start button. Okay, so notice that these two components correspond exactly with the two components that I have here. So if I added a third component and look at my code, there's my third component. Now I have a label, so I have a whole nother set of blocks that I can work with. Okay, that's going to happen every single time. The more components you add, the more options you have that show up here in my blocks view. So these are going to be very similar. I can rename, I can delete, I can upload some medias here as well. And these are also drag and drop. So if I want to drag, let's say this button, this piece of code, I'll drag it onto my space here. And there's a couple things here. I have warnings, so if blocks don't go together, you might end up with warnings. If you have just random blocks all over the place, there's lots of reasons why you would have warnings and errors. Over here, this will center my blocks. So you have lots and lots of space to work with. Sometimes it's going to be a lot. So if you want to try and get your bearings and center everything, get you back to the beginning, you can click on that. You have a zoom in and a zoom out button. You have a trash can, you can throw something away. You can also hit the delete button. What else? We have a backpack that'll allow you to store some blocks. If you have a specific piece of code you want to reference or use again, you can put it in your backpack to save later. And you have the same toolbar as you do on the designer view up here. Okay, so that's pretty much the main. I just wanted to explain to you the main parts that you're going to be seeing: our palette, viewer, our components and properties. And then on the blocks, we have all of our code and then all the additional code depending on the components that you add. We have our coding area here, and then a few other things to help us navigate at the end. Okay, so our next, thank you for listening, and our next video I'm going to go over how we connect. So thank you.